Welcome back to Real Estate 101. Today we're going to continue our discussion on real estate law and talk a little bit about powers of attorney, and I'm pleased to be joined by Robert Adourian of Devery Smith Frank LLP. Robert, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
Okay, Robert, so what is a power of attorney?
It's a legal document where someone says, I authorize another person to act on my behalf to do my banking or my business or my real estate transactions.
Okay, so let's focus on real estate transactions. In what context would a power of attorney be used in a real estate transaction?
There are two typical situations. In one of the parties is going to be out of the country at the time of closing, and so they plan it out and they sign the document authorizing someone else. The second one that's typical in real estate is that you have someone who's owned their house for a long time. They're an older person, perhaps they're disabled or they have dementia, and they're not able to understand the transaction. So they had, years before, appointed a family member to do this kind of transaction if and when the time came that they couldn't.
Okay, so when a seller is using or has provided somebody a power of attorney, should a buyer be concerned?
Absolutely, Joe. Powers of attorney have often been used in fraudulent real estate transactions. So the buyer will typically arrange title insurance, and the title insurer has a protocol to review the power of attorney document, ask some questions to the seller's lawyer to make sure that they are comfortable that the power of attorney is valid and that the transaction can proceed.
Okay, so you talked about title insurance. What do title insurers look for when deciding if they're going to insure a property that may have had a power of attorney involved in the transaction?
Well, they're going to ask some very specific questions to the seller's lawyer. And typically, if the answers are that the seller's lawyer had prepared the power of attorney, witnessed it, knew the parties well, and after the transaction, the seller's lawyer was going to put the money into the bank account of the registered owner, they're going to be happy with that. If, on the other hand, the seller's lawyer says, these people are just walk-ins, I didn't know them before, the power of attorney was homemade, no lawyers were involved in it, and no legal advice was given, and I just don't know anything else about the people, that is a transaction that the title insurer will decline.
Okay, so what information should the attorney be prepared to provide?
When you're acting as power of attorney for someone, Joe, the lawyer in the transaction is going to ask you in advance for some fairly specific information about the transaction so that they can convey that information to the title insurer. What the circumstances are of the sale, why the person who owns the property is not in a position to sign the documents. They'll also ask you for identification, and they may ask you to somehow verify your relationship to the individual. Finally, they'll want bank account information for the individual so that they can deposit those funds directly into the account of the owner and not to your account.
Okay, so at what point is a power of attorney no longer valid?
It could be no longer valid if it is revoked in writing by the individual, so they actually sign a document saying that I revoke this power of attorney and I don't want the person I appointed to use it anymore. Or if it is revoked by a court order, or if the person who gave the power of attorney dies. In any of those circumstances, the authority under the power of attorney comes to an end immediately.
Okay, so with identity theft as big an issue as it is today, do lenders have any issues when powers of attorney are used?
Yes, they do. And in fact, some of the major financial institutions have said absolutely not. You cannot use a power of attorney to refinance a transaction. Most of them will allow some discretion, but they're also going to want to ask some pointed questions. So, for example, if there is a mortgage on the property with Bank of Montreal for $100,000, and you're financing with TD Bank for $110,000 to pay off that $100,000 mortgage and have $10,000 to pay some expenses for the individual who owns the property, that's going to work. If the property is free and clear, and somebody is suddenly, after many years, putting on a $500,000 mortgage using a power of attorney, with no explanation as to why those funds are being used. Or maybe there is an explanation that the bank doesn't like. For example, a widowed mom is mortgaging her house for the son to invest in a business.
In a business, yeah.
That's just not going to fly.
Okay, so can somebody appoint anybody they want as a power of attorney? And are there any limitations to it?
The person you appoint must be at least 18 years of age, and they cannot be a bankrupt if that person is not discharged from bankruptcy yet. Other than that, you just have to use common sense and get the advice of your professional advisors. For example, a widowed mom who has 3 children might want to appoint one of her children because that adult child is living in the same city, whereas the others are elsewhere. But I always tell people that it's a good idea to have all the family members in the loop. Let everybody know what's going on so that there won't be any surprises.
All right, Robert, so any last tips for viewers of our show that are thinking about, handing somebody a power of attorney?
Yes, Joe, like any legal document, it's a good thing to get legal advice before you do it. And we would certainly be pleased to sit down and explain to people what is involved, what powers they're giving over, to discuss whether there should be any restrictions in the document. And of course, we always suggest to people that they speak to the person or persons they're planning to appoint. Make sure that they understand the responsibilities that they're taking on and that they're willing to do it.
All right, Robert, great stuff. I want to thank you for coming on today's show and hope to see you again sometime down the road.
Thanks so much, Joe.
So if you have any questions or need more information on powers of attorney, get in contact with Robert Adourian of Devery Smith Frank, LLP. I'm Joe, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.